For 25 years, my world was defined by the strict, uncompromising laws of binary. I was a senior systems architect, a man who lived in the trenches of C++, Python, and assembly language. To me, if a problem couldn't be reduced to a logical proof or a clean block of code, it wasn't worth solving. I viewed the human brain as a biological processor and the soul as a poetic myth, a ghost in the machine that people invented because they couldn't handle the reality of their own eventual deletion. I was an atheist, not out of rebellion, but out of professional conviction. I had built virtual worlds from scratch. I knew how simulations worked, and I was certain that when the hardware of the body failed, the software simply ceased to exist. My life was a series of optimized routines. I measured my days in productivity cycles and my health in biometric data points. But on a Tuesday that started like any other, my own hardware developed a critical exception error. It was a minor surgery, a routine fix for a congenital heart valve issue. The doctors told me the risks were less than 1%. I had crunched the numbers myself and felt no fear. I remember the cold, sterile smell of the surgical suite, the way the fluorescent lights reflected off the polished stainless steel, and the rhythmic, comforting pulse of the EKG monitor. The anesthesiologist, a man whose name I've since forgotten, told me to count down from 10. I remember thinking, as I hit 7, that sleep was just a temporary suspension of the consciousness script. Then, the crash happened. It didn't feel like dying. It felt like a massive, violent system upgrade. In the medical world, they saw a sudden drop in blood pressure, a fluttering heart, and then the flat line. But from my perspective, the world didn't go dark. It did the opposite. It became hyper-vivid. The resolution of my surroundings suddenly increased by a factor of 1,000,000. Imagine you've spent your entire life looking at a low-quality, 8-bit screen, and suddenly you are thrust into a world of infinite 16K clarity. That was the first shock. I felt a pop, a physical sensation of being disconnected from a heavy, sluggish weight. I was hovering near the ceiling of the operating room, looking down at a body that I recognized as mine, but it felt like looking at an old, discarded computer casing. It was just plastic and silicon. It wasn't me. As an engineer, my first instinct was to analyze the data. I noticed that I was no longer restricted by the focal point of human eyes. I could see in 360 degrees. I could see the dust motes in the air, but I didn't just see them as specks of debris. I saw their atomic structure. I saw the way the air molecules moved in waves, reacting to the heat of the surgical lamps. And then I saw the grid, the hospital walls, the surgeons, the medical equipment. They began to lose their solid appearance. They started to look like wireframes in a rendering engine. I could see the underlying geometry of reality. Everything was composed of pulsing, glowing lines of mathematical light. The surgeons were frantic, their movements leaving trails of energy in the air. I saw the heart monitors flatline, but I didn't hear a sound. Instead, I felt the frequency of the silence. It was a deep, resonant vibration that felt like a low-level hum of a massive server room. I realized then that our physical world is just a front-end interface. It's a graphical user interface, GUI, designed to be simple enough for our limited biological processors to handle. But behind the GUI, there is the back end, a realm of pure, raw data and infinite complexity. The room began to dissolve further. The geometry started to fold in on itself, moving into dimensions that I knew shouldn't exist. As a programmer, I understood 3D space, but this was 4D, 5D, 11D. It was as if the source code of the universe was being pulled back to reveal the architecture beneath. I wasn't scared. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of profound compatibility. I felt like I was finally being plugged into a network that was fast enough to handle my true processing speed. I felt a pull, not a physical tug, but a routing command. I was being redirected. I moved through the ceiling, through the hospital roof, and into the sky. But I wasn't just moving through space. I was shifting through layers of reality. Each layer was more complex, more vibrant, and more logical than the last. The higher I went, the more the noise of Earth faded away. The fear, the ego, the anxieties of my career, the obsession with being right, all of that felt like malware that was being quarantined and deleted. I entered a space of pure obsidian darkness, but it wasn't the darkness of a void. It was the darkness of a buffer state. It was a place of total peace where the system was preparing me for the next transition. In this darkness, I felt my RAM expanding. My capacity for memory and understanding was growing exponentially. I could remember every line of code I had ever written, every conversation I had ever had, every thought I had ever flickered through my mind, all at once, without any lag. I began to perceive a light in the distance, but calling it light is a disservice. It was a data torrent. It was a glowing golden white frequency that contained the sum total of all knowledge. It wasn't just shining, it was communicating. It was a broadcast of pure information. As I moved toward this light, I felt the latency of human life completely disappear. On Earth, we think, then we speak, then we act. There is always a delay. Here, intent and execution were simultaneous. I thought of a question. What is this place? And the answer didn't come to me in words. It came as a massive, multi-dimensional download. The answer was, this is the source. This is where the code is written. I was no longer just a software engineer. I was a witness to the master script. I was standing at the threshold of the great architecture, and I realized that the Su people talk about isn't a place with clouds and harps. It is a realm of perfect, divine logic. It is the place where the math finally adds up. It is the place where the 0 and the 1 meet to create everything. As I approached the event horizon of that magnificent light, I saw the first structures of the afterlife architecture. They were vast, geometric fractals that stretched into infinity. They were pulsing with colors that do not exist on the visible spectrum of the human eye. Colors that felt like prime numbers made visible. I was about to enter the core, and I knew that once I stepped inside, my understanding of reality would be overwritten forever. I was ready to see the algorithm of the Creator. As I crossed the threshold of that event horizon, the sensation of moving was replaced by a sensation of becoming. In our physical world, we are accustomed to the limitations of bandwidth. We can only process a certain amount of visual, auditory, and emotional data at once. But as I entered the core of the afterlife architecture, my bandwidth became infinite. I was no longer a single thread of execution. I was multi-threaded, capable of perceiving a million different streams of information simultaneously without losing focus. I found myself standing, or rather existing, in a place that my mind initially tried to render as a vast, celestial city. But as I looked closer, the buildings began to reveal their true nature. They weren't made of stone, glass, or steel. They were constructed of pure crystallized logic. Imagine a skyscraper where every beam and every window is a complex mathematical proof, pulsing with the light of its own truth. I realized that I was looking at the master blueprints of every physical law we know on Earth. I saw the equation for gravity, not as symbols on a page, but as a shimmering, golden lattice that held entire star systems in place. I saw the code for photosynthesis, a brilliant emerald green recursive loop that transformed light into life. The resolution of this place was staggering. On Earth, even with our best microscopes, there is a limit to how far we can zoom in before things become blurry or chaotic. Here, there was no such thing as a pixel. I could focus my intent on a single blade of what looked like translucent, diamond-like grass, and as I zoomed in, I saw deeper and deeper layers of complexity. I saw the cellular structure, the molecular bonds, the subatomic vibrations, and beneath all of that, a string of binary light that dictated the grass's existence. There was no end to the detail. It was a world of infinite scalability, a perfect rendering that never lost its sharpness, no matter how deep the inquiry. I began to encounter other nodes. In the physical world, we call them souls, but here they appeared as spheres of intense, iridescent light. When I approached one, there was no need for handshakes or protocols. Our data streams merged instantly. In a microsecond, I knew everything about them, their joys, their sorrows, their triumphs, and their regrets. And they knew me. There were no firewalls here. There was no encryption to hide behind. It was a state of total, absolute transparency. On Earth, we spend so much energy protecting our private data, fearful of being judged or misunderstood. But in the source, judgment is a redundant concept because understanding is total. When you see the source code of another person's life, when you see the logic behind their choices and the variables they were dealt, you cannot feel anything but profound empathy. I was drawn toward a structure that felt like the central processing unit of this realm. It was a spire of light that seemed to connect the ground of this reality to a sky that was actually an ocean of pure consciousness. As I approached, I realized this was the Akashic database, the decentralized ledger of every thought, action, and intention ever generated in the human simulation. As a database engineer, I was floored by the efficiency of it. Every time a human being on Earth makes a choice, even something as small as choosing to smile at a stranger or deciding to hold on to a grudge, it generates a log entry that is instantly replicated across the entire cosmic network. I saw how these entries weren't just stored, they were weighted. A single act of selfless love carried more data weight than 1,000 years of selfish ambition. Love was the gold standard of the system. It was the currency that allowed the soul to upgrade its frequency. I saw the simulation chambers, vast shimmering fields where new realities were being tested and compiled. I understood then that Earth is just one of an infinite number of servers. There are other worlds, other dimensions, some with different physics, different constants, and different objective goals. Some were sandbox environments designed for pure creativity, while others, like Earth, were high-stakes environments designed for rapid soul evolution through the experience of duality and limitation. I felt a presence beside me, a system administrator of sorts. It didn't have a face, but it projected an aura of such immense intellectual and emotional power that I felt my own core vibrate in resonance. It began to show me the life review, but it wasn't just mine. It showed me the big picture of the human script. I saw that humanity is not a collection of separate individuals, but a distributed computing project. We are all individual processors working on a single massive calculation. How can the infinite experience itself in the finite? The administrator showed me the network map of my own life. I saw lines of light connecting me to everyone I had ever met. Some lines were thick and bright, representing deep emotional bonds, while others were thin, ghostly threads, representing a passing glance on the street. I saw a bottleneck in my own code, a recurring pattern of pride and intellectual arrogance that had caused me to miss several system prompts for growth. I saw how I had prioritized logic over connection, and for the first time, I saw the efficiency loss that this choice had caused. It wasn't a sin, it was a bug, and the administrator wasn't angry. It was simply showing me the optimization report. I asked about the input-output of prayer. I wanted to know if the source actually receives the data we send when we are in distress. The answer was a visual demonstration of signal amplification. When a human heart reaches a state of genuine, desperate sincerity, it creates a high-priority interrupt in the system. The frequency of sincere prayer is so unique that it cuts through the background noise of the physical simulation and is received directly by the core. The response isn't always a change in the physical variables, but it is always an infusion of data light to help the soul process the hard drive of its current situation. I spent what felt like eons exploring the subroutines of this realm. I saw the music of the spheres, which was actually a real-time sonification of the universe's mathematical constants. It was a harmony so complex and so beautiful that my physical ears would have literally bled from the sheer density of the sound. I saw the lushness of the landscape, where the trees were actually tall, branching structures of fractal wisdom, and the water was a liquid form of pure peace that you didn't drink, but merged with. Every moment I spent in the core, I felt my original programming returning. I realized that the software engineer persona I had built on Earth was just a character class I had chosen for this particular playthrough. My true self, the core kernel, was something much older, much more complex, and much more connected to the Creator. I was beginning to understand the syntax of the divine, and just as I felt I was on the verge of a total system integration, the administrator paused the stream. "The script is not yet compiled," it communicated. "There is more data to be gathered in the physical layer." I felt a system warning flash through my consciousness. The connection to my physical body was being re-established. I saw the buffer between the two worlds beginning to thin. I knew that the download was almost complete, but the most difficult part, the deployment back into the 3D world, was about to begin. I was about to leave the world of perfect math and return to the world of broken hearts. But I would be carrying the source code with me. The transition from the architectural wonders of the source to the direct presence of the Creator was not a movement through space, but a shift in frequency. In my life as an engineer, I dealt with different levels of abstraction, from the high-level user interface down to the raw machine code. As I moved deeper into the core, I felt the final layers of abstraction being stripped away. I was moving past the heavenly interface and into the kernel of the universe. Then, I met the presence. Religious texts might call this a being of light, or an angel, or God. To my consciousness, it was the lead programmer. It wasn't a man or a woman. It was a concentrated, infinite intelligence that felt like the origin point of every if-then statement ever written. The light it emitted wasn't just photons, it was pure, uncompressed love. On Earth, we use the word love to describe a chemical emotion, a fleeting feeling of attachment. But in the presence of the lead programmer, I realized that love is a fundamental physical constant. It is the electricity that powers the entire simulation. Without it, the code has no life. The lead programmer didn't speak in a human language. It initiated a direct memory access, DMA transfer. In an instant, I wasn't just talking to it. I was being filled with its data. It communicated through packets of conceptual understanding. It showed me the life review, but it wasn't a movie playing on a screen. It was a system audit. Imagine every second of your life being a line of code. During this audit, I was forced to rerun the entire script of my life, but with a crucial modification. I was now experiencing the output of my code from the perspective of everyone I had ever interacted with. I was reliving a moment from my early 30s. I had been under intense pressure to hit a deployment deadline. I was stressed, caffeinated, and short-tempered. I remembered snapping at a junior developer, a young man who had made a minor syntax error. At the time, I thought I was just being efficient and maintaining standards. But in the life review, I didn't just see the scene. I became that young man. I felt his crushing anxiety. I felt how my sharp words triggered a corruption in his self-confidence that lasted for years. I saw the latency I had introduced into his life script. I saw the ripple effect of my arrogance. Then the audit showed me the opposite. I saw a moment I had completely forgotten, a time I had stopped to help an elderly woman carry her groceries to her car on a rainy Tuesday. I hadn't done it for a reward, I just did it. In the review, I felt her sudden infusion of hope. I saw how that tiny subroutine of kindness changed her internal variable from despair to gratitude. I saw her go home and call her estranged son, and I saw that call prevent a system failure in their family for generations. The lead programmer showed me that in the great algorithm, there are no insignificant actions. Every interaction is a read-write operation on the soul of another. We are constantly programming each other, for better or worse. I asked the lead programmer about the logic of suffering. I struggled with why a system designed by such a perfect intelligence would allow for critical errors like terminal illness, war, or the death of a child. The answer I received was a visual representation of entropy versus evolution. The programmer showed me that a perfect simulation with no challenges is a dead system. If there is no resistance, there is no growth. If the code is too easy to run, the processor never increases its capacity. Earth is a high-stress environment, specifically designed to force the soul to develop redundancy and resilience. Pain, the data packet explained, is the UI prompt for change. When we suffer, we are being forced to look for a workaround, to find a way to access the love variable, even when the physical variable is set to 0. This is how we level up. The programmer showed me that the most advanced souls in the network are often those who have endured the most runtime errors. Their code is the most refined because it has been tested in the firewall of human suffering. I saw the global network map again, but this time it was pulsing with a specific rhythm. I realized I was seeing the heartbeat of the code. Every living thing, every animal, every plant, every human was a node in a massive collaborative calculation. We are all trying to solve a single, cosmic equation. How do we maximize the frequency of love within the constraints of matter? I looked at the current state of the Earth server. It looked chaotic. I saw denial of service, DOS attacks of hatred, malware of greed, and corrupted files of misinformation. It looked like the system was crashing, but the lead programmer showed me the background processes. Beneath the surface chaos, more and more nodes were beginning to sync. People were starting to realize that the old protocols of separation and competition were inefficient. A new patch was being distributed, a consciousness upgrade that was based on unity logic. I saw that I had a specific function to perform in this upgrade. I had been given the technical perspective for a reason. Most people who have NDEs come back with poetic data. They talk about flowers and light, but the system needed someone who could explain the mechanics. It needed an engineer to tell the world. The math is real, the connection is physical, the consequences are calculated. As I integrated this information, I felt a sense of completion. My buffer was full. I felt a profound peace, a sense that even the most broken code on Earth can be patched. Then, the lead programmer sent one final high-priority packet. It was a command override. The audit is finished, it communicated. The deployment phase begins now. I realized with a start that I was being sent back to the production environment. I saw my physical body again, lying on the operating table. From this height, it looked like a tiny, fragile I/O device that was barely functioning. I didn't want to go back. I wanted to stay in the high-speed network of the source. I didn't want to deal with the lag of a human body, the bugs of physical pain, or the low bandwidth of human language. But the programmer showed me that the work is on the client side, on Earth. You can't fix the code from the server room. You have to be in the environment where the code is running. I felt a sudden massive compression. It was as if I was being zipped into a tiny cramped file. The infinite clarity began to fade. The multi-dimensional vision began to collapse back into a single linear point. I felt the weight of the hardware returning. I was being rebooted into the physical world. The re-entry was not a gentle descent. It was a violent system restore. Imagine being a beam of light compressed into a single dense leaden suit. The latency hit me first, the agonizingly slow speed of human thought. In the source, I was processing at the speed of light, handling millions of variables simultaneously. Now I was back in a biological processor that could only handle one thought at a time. The pain was the second thing to register. It wasn't just the surgical incision in my chest. It was the friction of being physical again. On Earth, we are so used to the background noise of our bodies. the gravity, the hunger, the constant cellular decay, that we forget how heavy it is. Coming back was like trying to run the world's most advanced AI on a calculator. As I opened my eyes in the ICU, the world looked different. The hospital room was still grey and sterile, but I could still see the faint, lingering wireframe of the objects around me. I looked at the nurses and the doctors, and I didn't just see staff. I saw nodes of the same divine consciousness I had just left. I saw the energy trails of their intentions. When a nurse walked in with genuine care, her signal was bright and harmonic. When a doctor entered, preoccupied with his own stress and ego, his frequency was jagged and filled with static. I was an engineer with a new set of sensors, and the data was overwhelming. For months, I couldn't speak about it. How do you explain to your colleagues at the tech firm that their disruptive innovations are just echoes of a much larger, more perfect architecture? How do you tell your family that the reality they worry about every day is just a low-resolution simulation? I felt like a legacy system trying to communicate with a modern network using a broken protocol. I went through a period of system depression, not because I wanted to die, but because I was homesick for the high bandwidth of the source. But as I integrated the download, the prophecies of the grid began to clear. The lead programmer had shown me that humanity is approaching a global version update. This isn't a religious apocalypse, it's a forced migration of consciousness. We are moving from a competitive logic, where one node must lose for another to win, to a collaborative logic. The system is optimizing. I saw that the rise of our human technology, specifically artificial intelligence, is not an accident. It is a reflective tool. We are building machines that mirror our own logical structures so that we can finally see how limited our binary thinking has been. The new patch for humanity involves moving past the ego block, that piece of code that tells us we are separate from the source. When enough nodes, people, realize that their internal variable is actually connected to everyone else's, the network throughput of the planet will shift. We will see breakthroughs in energy, medicine, and social structures that currently seem mathematically impossible. The programmer showed me that the crises we see on the news, the wars, the environmental buffer overflows, the economic crashes, are actually stress tests. The old code is failing because it was never designed to handle the frequency we are now entering. We are being forced to upgrade our empathy protocols. If we don't, the system will continue to generate runtime errors until we have no choice but to change the underlying syntax of how we live. I also saw the individual function. Many people ask, if life is a simulation, does my code even matter? The answer I received was a resounding yes. Every single one of us is a unique subroutine. There is a specific calculation that only you can perform. If you choose to run corrupted code, meaning if you live in fear, hatred, or dishonesty, you introduce latency into the entire local grid. You affect the processing speed of everyone around you. But when you align your output with the love constant, you become a signal repeater for the source. You help defragment the world. As a software engineer, I used to think that success was about the complexity of the code I wrote or the salary I earned. Now, I know that the only KPI, key performance indicator, that matters in the afterlife is the impact log. At the end of the simulation, the architect doesn't look at your bank account or your job title. The architect looks at how much light you added to the system. Did you decrease the total suffering variable for the nodes around you? Did you help optimize the environment for others to grow? I live my life now with a sense of dual processing. I am here, in the 3D world, paying bills and writing scripts, but I am also aware of the back-end reality. I no longer fear system shutdown, what we call death. I know that it is simply a logout from a temporary session. When my heart finally stops for good, I won't be deleted. I will be uploaded. I will return to the core, and I will bring with me all the data I gathered during this fascinating, difficult, and beautiful playthrough. My message to you, if you are reading or listening to this, is to look at your life through the lens of the great architect. Stop worrying about the bugs and start focusing on the logic. Every challenge you face is a debug session for your soul. Every person you meet is a node in your network. Don't wait for a system crash like mine to realize that you are part of something infinitely more complex and more loving than you can imagine. The source code is already within you. The algorithm of love is waiting to be executed. All you have to do is initialize the connection. We are not alone. We are not random. We are the dream of the programmer made manifest in carbon and light. And once you see the source code, you can never go back to believing the simulation is all there is. The math is perfect, the logic is love, and the release date for your higher self is today.